Hi everyone, and welcome back to Tokyo on Fire. Today is April 11th, 2017. We are always discussing here on Tokyo on Fire business issues and diplomacy between Japan and the United States, between Japan and other neighboring countries, and trying to figure out what are the issues that are of economic importance to us doing business here. We're going to talk about a lot of these issues that are really emerging very forcefully now. I'm joined with my regular guest, Dr. Nancy Snow. Dr. Nancy Snow, welcome.
Thank you, Tim.
And Glen Fukushima joins us once again. Glen, thank you for coming.
Great to be here. Thank you.
There's an awful lot going on that we can discuss. Members of the cabinet traveling to Tokyo, North Korea exploding, hopefully not, but it's big in the news. What's going on in Syria too? Glen, what's going on in your world that's related to the Japan-U.S. relationship?
Well, in U.S.-Japan, as you say, Secretary of State Tillerson was visiting Japan a few weeks ago, and then Vice President Pence will be visiting Japan next week. And Prime Minister Abe was there, in Washington on February 10th. But there's a lot kind of follow-up from that summit meeting. The Vice President will meet with Deputy Prime Minister Aso on this bilateral economic dialogue.
In about 2 weeks.
Yeah, about a little more than a week, right.
And the big news is, finally, Bill Haggerty has received an appointment as a nominee for the ambassador to Tokyo.
Right, so he's been officially nominated by the Trump administration, and so now the Senate confirmation meetings, the hearings have to be held. But I think, based on the past record of ambassadors coming to Japan, I think the earliest was April when Tom Schiefer came in the second Bush administration, and the latest was Tom Foley at the end of November in the second Clinton administration. So sometime between April and November, I think we'll see the new ambassador arrive.
Yes, I've recently heard that probably the confirmation hearings will be a little bit accelerated, and he could be here as early as July.
I see. Well, that'd be good.
That would be great because actually the embassy here and probably the entire diplomatic community is in a bit of a hiatus. I mean, they're not getting the directions from above. They're in place. Jason Hyland is acting ambassador. He's deputy
Chief of Mission.
Deputy Chief of Mission.
Right.
And so I think people are just waiting for this machinery to go, but it seems to be very top-heavy, isn't it?
I think one of the things is that it's been pointed out in Washington that the appointment process, nomination process has been very slow in this administration, slower than most. I think most administrations, by around March or April, the deputy secretary, undersecretary, and assistant secretary positions are at least nominated, and many of them have been confirmed. But at this point, the State Department, I think, other than the secretary and Nikki Haley as ambassador to the United Nations, there's no deputy in place, there's no undersecretary, so it's taking some time.
Well, wasn't William Haggerty one of the key features of the appointment process in identifying those people to fill some of these appointments?
He was on the transition team. That's right. Yep.
Okay. Well, I had heard that one of the reasons why he was identified as a potential ambassador was because of his involvement in that particular aspect of parceling out the largesse of the election campaign.
I do know that he was in Japan from, I think, 89 to 92 with the Boston Consulting Group. And I remember meeting with him soon after I arrived in Japan and when I was working with the chamber. So I do remember him from that period, but I think it's partly based on the experience he had for 3 years in Japan, also being head of the Economic Development Office in Tennessee, and he dealt a lot with Japanese companies apparently in that capacity.
So I think one of the most important features of a ambassador in any country, but particularly for us here in Japan, is their relationship with the president. How close are they? What kind of communications vehicle are they comfortable in using?
Right.
And I don't know what the relationship is between Bill Haggerty and the president. Do you have any insight on that?
I don't know. I've just read that he had worked on the Romney campaign in 2012. And also in this 2016 election campaign, he actually was working on the Jeb Bush campaign. And then when Jeb Bush stepped down, then he switched over to the Trump group. And so, and he's apparently played a key role on the transition team.
One of the features of the current administration that a lot of people are pointing out is that it's, number one, it's not really getting integrated very quickly, but also that there's a lot of power that's invested in the top the top players. And for example, the vice president will be coming to Tokyo in less than 2 weeks.
Right.
Defense secretary was here
Yes.
4 weeks ago, and then that was followed up by the Secretary of State. There's a lot of action here in Japan, but it seems to be very top heavy.
Yeah, that's true. I think partly it's that the confirmation process has taken a lot of time. Also, this particular administration seems to be putting a lot of people in the White House. A lot of people in the White House. And so there are many positions there that weren't there before. This National Trade Council that Peter Navarro is heading. There's a special advisor for deregulation that Carl Icahn is heading. There's lots of positions that are being created in the White House. And one of the things that you know in the White House is that it doesn't require Senate confirmation. So the president can pretty much appoint who he or she, who he'd like to have on the White House staff. So at this point, I think, as you say, it is very top heavy. I assume that by sometime, by fall, end of this year, that those positions will be filled down to the assistant secretary level.
Right. Even now, we can see the jockeying for positions, the jockeying for influence. I mean,
Sure.
Steve Bannon apparently has been moved over, not demoted, but some
He's
could
been
say
taken off the permanent, the National Security Council.
Yes, but that's because that's what I wanted. I mean, you just
That's
never
a
know.
demotion.
Yes.
It is a demotion.
Right.
And not only that, but you see Trump giving Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, these positions. Now they're officially government employees. And before they were family members whom he trusted very closely. And he's talked about this in his books regularly. Right. So it doesn't surprise us, does it, that without the Senate confirmation that you can just keep adding people, because that's what Trump wants, is I think he wants people on a short leash there. And the State Department, I can tell you, having worked there, the morale is really terrible, and you're not hearing from people because they really don't know what the country plans are because so few people are in place, as Glen says.
Well, how much was it, the budget cut?
The 29% proposed. Budget was proposed. We'll see, but it is
they may not get that much.
But that just shows you how much love he's devoting to that particular part of running the government.
How much love, right?
Right.
It's really, too, I think, the corporatization of foreign policy. So public diplomacy, which was part of the State Department umbrella, has been discussed in the New York Times, Washington Post. It's gotten attention for its lack of priority in this administration because Tillerson, when he came to Japan, or when he had his first, I guess it was during the trip to Japan, he had one reporter from a conservative journal with him. Yep. So in public diplomacy, it's always about your relationship with the public, diplomacy to the public. And you need the media there to help shape the narrative. So we still don't know what the narrative is.
Right.
What is the story of America to the world?
Well, I think the worlds that are represented by what Barack Obama represented and what current president represents are so far apart. And not only that, but there's a bit of a lingering war that's going on. So it looks like everybody has to get used to this new game in town, and some of it doesn't rely on getting the word out through the standard press. I mean, obviously the press is being denigrated all the time by this administration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is very troubling because I think going forward, if we do get that kind of a cut at the State Department, it is going to damage America's role in the world. Trump has been a puzzle to me from day in and day out. When he was a candidate, he was talking about being so non-interventionist, and he said Hillary Clinton would be the first to take us into war. She was the warmonger. He was very critical of Obama with his red line comment back in 2013. And he said, if you go in, if you intervene in Syria, it's going to be a big mess. He was tweeting about that then when he didn't have all the followers he does now. And now we have this turnabout. But the conspiracy story could be that with the strike on Syria, that shifted the focus away from how close the Trump administration was to Putin and Russia during the campaign and even after. Remember all the talk about Russian hacking, that went away. And now you have Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, even being supportive of the Syria strikes. So now he's flexing his muscles. Russia is upset with the U.S. Meanwhile, a lot of allies around the world have been supportive, and even the American people, 6 out of 10, are in support of these initial strikes.
Right.
What we don't know is what's next.
Right. Right. Well, it's a new game. I think a lot of people are also noting that Rex Tillerson seems to be growing into this role, this global role that he has, and it's a new gig for him. Let's see if he becomes a little bit more vocal in what the pronouncements are of U.S. foreign policy, because we really haven't heard much on that at all.
Well, remember, Glenn, when Tillerson was saying Rex Tillerson wanted a more efficient State Department, and he's certainly running a very efficient, streamlined approach. You wonder what it was like when he was CEO of ExxonMobil. Was it the same thing? He's not used to having to give directives to this large bureaucracy, but the diplomats, the seasoned diplomats there, they're being really sort of ignored with all the experience, all of the know-how, all of the sort of frame of the game on the ground.
Yeah, we don't know that though. I mean, like Glenn said, the top, the medium top, and the top have not been put into place. So they're kind of waiting for directions too.
But will he listen to them?
And even at the
That's
top
what I
level,
wonder.
like Bob Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, his confirmation hearings have been held, but he hasn't yet been formally confirmed. And so, a lot of the press speculation has been that Wilbur Ross, Commerce Secretary, is going to be playing a very lead role on trade issues, but Lighthizer is not going to be a shrieking violet. So, I mean, to see the role that Lighthizer at USTR plays, that Wilbur Ross at Commerce plays, that Tillerson at State, this is all, we're going to have to watch to see how this all plays out.
We didn't know when the president was campaigning, or actually when he got elected, what role Japan would play in the dynamics of the U.S. global position. But it looks like it's taking a pole position, and probably some of that is due to the Prime Minister visiting the United States so quickly, and also maybe some of the pronouncements that he made, maybe some of the things that happened on the golf course. But it looks like that relationship is beginning to gel a little bit. The Vice President will be here too.
As you say, during the campaign and also during the last 30-some years, Donald Trump has been writing and saying things about Japan that are pretty critical. Basically, they steal our jobs, they only export, they don't import, they're manipulating their currency, and they're free riders on defense. So I think a lot of people in Japan and around the world were thinking, well, Donald Trump is going to change all of that with Japan. But on the security side, at least, it looks like everything's the same.
Right.
The Senkaku Islands are still under Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. And the only thing it appears that might change is on the economic side, where President Trump said in the joint press conference with Prime Minister Abe on the 10th of February, he said, from now on, between the U.S. and Japan, the economic relationship is going to be free, fair, and reciprocal. And I think the emphasis was on reciprocal. So I think that, at least in Trump's mind, I think he wants to see some rectification, in his view, of the imbalance of the benefits going so much to Japan.
Right.
So on the economic side, I think once the team gets into place, that there will be some changes. But on the security side, I think things are pretty much the same.
It looks like it's actually being exercised as the situation in North Korea begins to heat up too.
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting to watch.
Well, that's happening right now. I mean, the USS Carl Vinson is now steaming towards the South Japan Sea.
So the Syria, the missiles set, the 59 Tomahawk missiles. It's really interesting to kind of try to analyze what was the motivation and what was the intended aim of this. And you could make the argument that this was a signal to obviously to Syria, and to say that unlike Barack Obama, when there's a red line, we're going to act on it when they use chemical weapons. That's message to Syria, message to the United States, and a message to Russia, as you say, a message to North Korea, a message to China. So it's interesting that it's kind of a multi-purpose action, and it'll be interesting to see how the message is received by each of these parties.
Well, you keep doing what works for you, and that one seems to have worked in some ways. Maybe, if it's going to be a backfire, we don't know if it's a backfire yet, but maybe that is one of the signature moves of the Trump administration. We're just seeing the first signs of it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting because, with regard to North Korea, there's one view which says, well, if Trump shows the use of force, that will get the North Koreans to be more accommodating to having negotiations. On the other hand, there's some who say, well, it's precisely because Trump made that kind of a strike that the North Koreans will think that's why we have to have nuclear weapons. That's why we have to have missiles to prevent that from happening to us, like in the case of Libya. So, yeah, it's interesting to see what the intended message is and what the received message is with each of these parties.
Right. The vice president will be visiting in less than 2 weeks, and we also learn that the president might be passing through towards the fall.
Yeah, I think I think Prime Minister Abe has invited the president to visit, and I think he's accepted for some time in the fall. And also Xi Jinping, in the meeting he had with the president, also invited, and apparently Trump has accepted that. So I don't know whether they're going to be on the same trip or separate trips, and people obviously will be watching which one does he go to first.
Right.
Yep.
With the Xi Jinping visit over the weekend, it really coincided with the strike on Syria. So even though the rhetoric was very positive coming out of it, you have to wonder if Xi felt sort of like, I didn't get my day in the sun.
Second fiddle here.
Yeah, I mean, this is China again. So the expectation was probably that the rhetoric was not going to be that strong and positive between them. But he had to come out and say that China at least had a very nuanced, positive response to the strike on Syria, didn't it? So it was while he was visiting Mar-a-Lago again, here we go, all the diplomacy taking place there in South Florida. So what's going to happen to the U.S.-China relationship? And then Abe immediately gave his support to the strike. And Abe, he's got this delicate dance with Putin in Russia. So the pivot has been with the U.S. away from Russia and Putin, and with stronger, harsher rhetoric coming out of Russia, and now with this pivot to China. And it really is putting a greater spotlight on Asia, Northeast Asia in particular. And I wonder now with Seoul and Korea, with all of the turmoil they've had with Park and just the drama there, how they must be feeling with this military strike. They're worried about North Korea.
They're a hell of a lot more worried than Japan is, that's for sure.
I know it.
Because Seoul can be hit with just artillery barrages, right? I mean, if they get hit, and in fact, they can see when it's coming in too, so they have a little bit of warning, and it would be awful hard to protect Seoul in that sort of a situation.
But as Nancy says, with the election coming up in South Korea, and Mr. Moon becomes the president, as the public opinion polls show, then he is someone who is known to have a much softer line towards North Korea and also towards China. So that could be a new element in the mix as well. So
I don't know. I think the real target for the Syria action was North Korea. And it happened when the Chinese premier was in town with the president. And, that signal would be very strong. We will take action, and we're not afraid to spend a couple of $1 million on these cruise missiles. I mean, they're so expensive, and the amount of damage that they had was kind of minimal in terms of what the cost-benefit was.
Right.
So it was a signal.
But I think at the beginning of the administration, it was so rocky for Trump, wasn't it? And then with Abe's visit, that went well, and it did spotlight Japan. But now, all of a sudden, there's great fear about more military strikes. The U.S. really flexing its muscle, becoming the world's policeman again. This was not Trump's promise when he was running for office. If anything, he said, I don't want to be the global leader. I want to take care of America first. That was the whole approach.
Can you comment on that, Glenn? The military role in the Trump administration seems like it's begun to reach some sort of a prominence, and
but it's almost kind of inevitable in the sense that I think that the two kinds of people that Trump seems to trust and has hired for senior positions are wealthy business people and ex-military people. So for the first time in many, many years, you have a military person who is Secretary of Defense. You have a military person who's head of the National Security Council. You have a military person who's head of Homeland Security. And in a sense, I think with kind of a vacuum that we see on the political side, with so few positions, senior positions being occupied in the State Department and other places, that actually the military actually is in place because the military is very professional and they have the continuity and stability. And there's much more organizational continuity in the military. So I think in many ways, the military right now is in a position of being able to provide the kind of advice, recommendations, options and so forth, which I think the political side really may not be able to, because there aren't people at the deputy and undersecretary and assistant secretary level. So the balance of influence right now may actually be in favor of the military people, I think.
Didn't Trump visit the Pentagon, though? I mean, in one of his first 2 visits?
He went to the CIA. I don't know that he went to the Pentagon, but he did go to the CIA,
Okay.
sure, right.
But clearly the military role is prominent in the Trump administration currently.
Well, but the budget too. I mean, he says we're going to increase the budget, the military budget by 10%, but cut the State Department 29%. So that alone shows, the emphasis. But although I think most of the thought was that was going to be focused on kind of the anti-terrorism, as opposed, and so being more of a defensive kind of effort as opposed to aggressively going out on the offensive. But as Nancy says, contrary to what he said during the campaign, he seems to be taking offensive measures.
Whatever works, it seems. You have to keep watching these kinds of issues because it portends what's going to be happening in the near term and in the medium term. We're going to continue to watch this and report this to you. Please stay tuned.